There is an important and interesting symbolic method for relating the whole Gnostic Sophia tradition to the mythology of Egypt. The Egyptian symbol, which allows our imagination to comprehend aspects of the Gnostic way of understanding, is the symbol of the scarab, perhaps specifically the Scarabaeus caesar, commonly referred to as the sacred scarab. But the association of the scarab and Sophia is not in any way easily apparent. The reproduction process of the scarab is an emulation of a symbolic earth. This is where Sophia and the scarab conjoin as mythology. Sophia is a force of energy that materializes itself as a sphere of the earth. In that sphere of the earth, her forces are the emanating factors which reproduce themselves as human life. Likewise, the scarab will gather up a ball of dung, mold it into a sphere, and begin rolling it. During the day, the scarab rolls the ball in a direction that is oppositional to the movement of the sun. As the sun moves from east to west, wherever a scarab is, it will start pushing its dung ball in the opposite direction. The scarab takes organic matter and forms it into a ball, as Sophia did with her own energy. She formed the ball and put inside that ball her goddess forces. As the scarab rolls the ball, it will find a little cavern or excavate a hole. There it carefully spends days making the ball into a perfect sphere, molding it, shaping it. Then it will insert into the ball its eggs. Then, just like Sophia, the forces of life are planted into her creation of the earth. Ancient Egyptians, in observing beetles emerge from the ball of dung, believed that this behavior was an anomaly. They assumed that the male beetle was able to reproduce without needing a female, in a mode of reproduction requiring only one sex, called parthenogenesis. They saw this behavior as a metaphor for Sophia giving birth to herself. The whole Gnostic myth is that Sophia has no counterpart, and that the Christos is not her mate, but someone who brings about the sense of limitation and order. Gnostic belief is that Sophia's self-birthing process is parthenogenic, birth through a single being. They believed that Sophia and the scarab shared this behavior, if only in metaphor. The Egyptians personified the Scarabaeus caesar through the god Khepri, which in Egyptian means "I am the becoming." This passage is from the Egyptian Book of the Dead. I am he who is constantly appearing, whose real nature is unknown. I am yesterday, he who has seen 1,000,000 years is one name of mine. I pass along the ways of those sky beings who determine destinies. I am the master of eternity, ordering how I am fated, like the great beetle. This just begins the association between the scarab, Sophia, and the Kamutef. Kamutef is a twin god from Egypt who was a combination of Ra and Min. The Kamutef is the one who gives birth to itself and who throws off the cocoon and emerges as a creature of flight. The scarab rolls the ball of dung in conjunction with the movement of the sun and moon. Their gestational period is 28 days, almost exactly a lunar cycle. 28 is 4 times 7. Through a spiral of 7, the emergence of life and that of death is the same Sophian process of the destruction and creation of another phase of humanity. The Egyptians modeled that conception as the scarab. At this point, it might be valuable to trace the origins of the Gnostic myth of Sophia back to their beginnings in both Egyptian mythology and Vedic mythology. We have seen that by associating Sophia with the scarab and emphasizing the idea of parthenogenesis, that the whole sequence of the scarab giving birth actually involves or implicates all three feminine archetypes, that of the virgin, the mother, and the crone. The Sophia myth is archetypal through the idea of parthenogenesis to the Kamutef and also geometrically to the idea of a square. A square is a phenomena that one could say gives birth to itself. It multiplies. A square is a multiplication of a number or an entity with and by itself. We talked about that already with the number of the yuga. These mysteries are released once you seek out the root of a number, the square root, and also its expansion into space, the squaring of a number. Remember, the number of the yuga is 6048. When you find its square root, it is 7.777. Then, if you square the yuga, you get a number that is roughly the value of the solar year. 365 and a continuing decimal, 365.78304. These are the cross-fertilization numbers within the yuga number, a dense intersection of mythological imagery and narration with geometry and numerical values. This is the kind of thought process that the mind of ancient Egypt and India held as being a sacred faculty of human intelligence. If we move this parthenogenic principle into the Egyptian myth, one of the most prominent relationships that we make immediately is between Sophia and Isis. In the myth of Isis, Horus, and Osiris, there is a dark figure called Set, whose name is associated with the number 7, and therefore in relationship with the destructive aspects and necessities of the end of the cycle. The myth goes that Set deceives his brother, Osiris, and builds a coffin. Set says that it's a coffin for some other associate that has died, but he wants Osiris to lay down in the coffin so he can make sure it's the right fit or the right size. Remember that we are dealing with the symbol of the entire human species when we're telling stories of Osiris. Osiris was the figure in this age that gave humanity the principles of urbanization and agriculture. He is an archetype of the Yuga. All the gifts of Osiris mark the same period of time as the start of the Kali Yuga. Then Set uses deception to nail humanity into confinement and an enclosure of darkness. Then he sets the coffin out to sea. After flowing through the ocean of time, the coffin breaks up and the body of Osiris is revealed again, where Set uses his sword to cut Osiris into 14 pieces. Most believe that there are 14 pieces and the entire body collectively represents 15. We have already discovered that the relationship between 14 and 15 is a key to understanding the cycles of time. Throughout various interpretations, myth and mathematics trigger different levels of awareness concerning the actualities of our position in time and space. Isis then goes to seek out the severed pieces of her husband. She finds only the phallus of Osiris, and she knows that the only way to bring him back is through a rebirth. This is exactly the Yuga story. The only way we can bring this Yuga to a close is through death and rebirth on a species level. In esoteric geometry, the phallus, or at least the head of the phallus, is equated to the shape of the pentagon. This becomes a symbol of the reproductive power of form. There are 3 aspects to the concept of the soul in ancient Egypt. These are the Ka, the Ba, and the Ak. Let's get into understanding all 3 of these aspects. We will start with the Ka. The Ka is the physical body and the spirit that is embedded in substance. The Ka remains behind on Earth until the decomposition of the body. The Ka is one of the most complicated aspects of the human soul. Egyptians believed that a field of energy that is 7-fold in nature exists around the body of a human being. There are 7 different vibrations contained within the Ka. These vibrations emanate from 7 centers, which are known in India as chakras. Each one of these participates as an emanating frequency which builds up the body of the Ka. A major part of the psychophysical science of Egypt is associated with the Ka. It is interesting that the Ka and the centers are based on the number 7, which is the basis of the Yuga system. This carries the vibrational content and structure of the Earth and Moon, which is also a 7-fold number and a 7-fold system. The body of man is a continuation of that same resonant cycle. When we look even deeper into the atom and molecular bindings, we find a similar resonance to the time cycles that mark the duration of the Yuga. The Ka is an energy which surrounds the body but can be loosened from the body through initiatic practices. In the West, we call this practice astral travel. One can actually employ a means to disassociate this energy from the physical body for certain experiences. The Egyptians made this energy body the basis of what we call the invention of kingship. Kingship is based on the Ka. The Egyptians had a ceremonial procedure in which they premeditated the potentiality of a person's death, particularly a pharaoh. The dying pharaoh would enter into a ceremony with the pharaoh that is to take his place, and they would disassociate the Ka from the dying pharaoh and associate it around the new pharaoh. The pharaoh's Ka was his royalty. His kingship was based upon not only the crown, which cuts off and signifies the crown of the head, but also that he has a Ka of 14 energy fields, twice that of normal people. That is the key idea in the great concept of kingship, which was essential to the hierarchy that led to civilization. The symbol for the Ka looks like this. This emulates the circle of energy around the human body, and that the energy can be moved and spun. Another aspect of the Egyptian view of the soul is the Ba. The Ba is the eternal part of the soul. At death, the Ba goes back to the source. This is the way the Ka, through spinning, creates a movement in which we can experience the nature of flight called astral travel. There are always different levels built into these simple little glyphs that the Egyptians chose. All of them have a depth of meaning that most of us will never understand. According to the ancient Egyptians, unless something is conveying at least 6 different meanings simultaneously, it's not worth saying, and it's not worth thinking. The other aspect of this trinity found within the Egyptian soul is the Ak. While the Ka is associated with the body, the Ak is associated with the spirit. The Ka and the Ak, you can see how they inverse in the way they are pronounced. It's just a reshuffling inversion of the concepts of the spirit and the body. One is almost the mirror reflection of the other. This inversion of sounds means that the Ka and the Ak are opposites. In order to allow the Ka to stay with the new pharaoh, they mummified the old pharaoh. They wrapped his body and did everything they could to maintain and prevent the total decomposition of the body. That's what the mummification process is all about. They surrounded the mummy of the dead pharaoh with 8 coffins, one for each of the vibrations of the Ka. That would be the 7 chakras and the Ka itself. These coffins are placed at a distance from the mummified body, at the same distances as the emanations of those energies coming from the body in life. All of the Egyptian death and afterlife practices are based on this science of the Ka. Through mummification, they maintained a continuity of the Ka. Through these practices and rituals, a collective memory was passed from pharaoh to pharaoh to pharaoh, and he had an expanse or an availability of intelligence and memory that far exceeded his people. That was the reason he was their leader. Without this process, a true sense of hierarchy cannot be maintained. Ancient Egyptians would call today's system of hierarchy, particularly in the West, an utter fraud, because it does not have the element of collective knowledge endowment, which they believed was essential in creating a hierarchy of the human species. Egypt was an empire. Egypt was a hierarchy. They may have been the most enlightened of empires, but still they are part of the Kali Yuga. The Egyptian empire was established and their history recorded with hieroglyphs and in scrolls on the exact date of the beginning of the Kali Yuga. Egypt was an attempt to save the knowledge of the ancients. They knew they had to conform to the processes that ultimately hastened the destruction phase and transformation phase of our species, but at the same time, they were intent on maintaining and preserving some of the higher knowledge of the past. The Egyptians, through their monuments, hieroglyphs, and symbols, were attempting to maintain the knowledge. That knowledge had been gained through the previous 54,000 years of the first 3 Yuga cycles of the over 60,000-year-long Mahakalpa. Some of the hieroglyphic-covered granite blocks found in Egypt could easily survive tens of thousands of years and still be readable. Like seeing a great storm approaching, the Egyptians went out of their way to save the past. This is the great untold story of ancient Egypt and the vain attempt by the pharaohs and priests to preserve the sacred knowledge of the Golden, Silver, and Bronze Ages through the destruction and nightmare of the coming Kali Yuga. On that basis, we can expect to find pre-Yuga knowledge guiding Egyptian thought, but modified so that it fits within the boundary of time within the Yuga. We must understand how it is possible for us to participate in a transmission and conveyance of what we are and what we have achieved in this final phase of a great body of time that necessitates an extinction. As Buddha said, an extinguishment and a rebirth. Let's move our discussion to another aspect of the science of the soul, which is the Akh. The Akh is an energy field that always remains as a configuration within the ether of the heavens. The Egyptians believed that they could affect the vibratory field of the sky by bringing to it the soul energy of their people. Another way to look at this is with a view from the Indians. They believe that all beings enter this world as food, and as food they all depart. That is, we are reassimilated into the Akh just like we assimilate food on earth, just as our blood and flesh are assimilated by the earth and give the earth a renewed spirit. So, it is that part of the human soul that arrives at the Akh and gives energy to the field. Bones have an amazing duration of self-preservation built into their molecular structure. Some bones of African pygmies have been tested to be 40,000 years old. The skeleton has a great power of endurance, and that is why it represents the Ka. The skeleton has a connection to the highest level of the soul. The Egyptians believed that the leg bones, the femur, the tibia, and the fibula, and the arm bones, the humerus, the radius, and the ulna, were of great importance. That's also why the image of the skull and bones was used by the Templars in their rituals. The Egyptians believed that in the core of the large bones of the body were the minerals which that person had assimilated during his life from eating, from taking plants and animals from the earth. They understood that all of this was crystallized in a mineral form in the bones. That crystalline substance of bones held a vibratory relationship to the Akh. At death, there is a separation of the soul. One aspect of the soul, the Ba, belongs with the beings in the heavens, but the bones keep a vibration that is in tune with the Ka, which stays here on earth. The Ka is a resonant body with the Akh. The Ka can maintain itself on earth in relationship to the bone structure that is left behind. The Ka returns to the earth for another incarnation through the vibration of the bones. That way, you are constantly reborn into the same pattern. The third state in this division of consciousness was in the Ba. This is the immortal state of existence. This is the aspect of consciousness that reincarnates. The Ba separates from consciousness at the moment of death and goes back into the well of souls to be reborn again. In our current lexicon, the words soul and spirit mean essentially the same thing. But looking at it more closely, it can be seen that the word soul is actually referencing the Ba. The Ba, or the soul, never dies. It reincarnates and continues its pilgrimage towards illumination. It has been described as that spark of divinity that resides within us all. In the hieroglyphs of Egypt, the Ba is the part of us that is conscious of leaving the earth at death and therefore is depicted as a winged human or a human bird. The bird symbol for the Ba represents the force that can free itself from the earth and soar into the cosmos, liberated from gravity and the material realm. This, then, is why the cultures of the ancient world held elaborate funerary ceremonies and rituals. These were all originally designed to help these three aspects of the soul find their way back. The ghost of the human, caught in the confusion of the afterlife, is guided back to their ka. Their transcendent spirit, the ak, goes back to its place in the sky, and the soul, the ba, returns to the center of beingness. We have talked about an image that appears at the midpoint of the Temple of Luxor called the Kamutef. The Kamutef embodies the mythological characteristics of the transformation prophesied for the next phase of human development. We can show that this image of the Kamutef has a very clear mathematical ratio of the golden mean to 1/2. That is emphasized by the fact that the erect phallus is raised up to the navel and put into connection with the maternal or birthing process, representing the nourishing process of nature. At the top of the Kamutef, his head has the skull cap removed. The symbolism here is that the upper part of the body is shown to be mummified. Mummification in Egypt is a symbol of the serpentine energy having entered a cocoon. Mummification and a succession of coffins also symbolize a cocoon. The arms coming out indicates the relationship between the larva and the butterfly. That is a concept that they held applicable to the whole development of the human species, that we have the potential to move from an earthbound creature which has enclosed itself as a larva and then emerges from that process. The larva is, of course, a symbol of the physical earth. We can emerge from that as a butterfly, a creature of flight, a creature of the higher spheres of existence. Now that creature of flight is also built into the verbalization of this image, the Kamutef, because the aspect of the human organism that can, even in its present state, be detached from the physical body and travel through the earth and through the heavens is the Ka, the energy field that surrounds our body. The prediction of Egypt for the future evolution of our species is that we will become more assimilated to the less densified form of ourselves, which is the Ka, the energy field surrounding us. There is the possibility that these people are informed by a kind of possession of the spirits of the dead. The Egyptians believed that there were spirits who were intentionally captive on the earth, in the same way that the pharaonic priests captivated the spirit energy of one pharaoh and passed it on to another. We know that such knowledge for manipulating the Ka, which is an Egyptian concept of the localized spirit of a person, did exist as it is written in hieroglyphs. After the defeat of Mark Antony by Octavian and the subsequent suicidal death of Cleopatra, Egypt became a Roman province in 30 BC, and the pharaonic people were faced with the decision of whether to live under the despotic rule and potential imprisonment of Rome or to seek refuge in Africa. Many sought the latter, as is evident by the knowledge discovered in various Western African cultures, principally that of the Dogon tribe in Mali. For example, the Dogon located and identified the star Sirius as culturally significant, similar to the Egyptians. All this thousands of years before modern technology could confirm the existence of these stars. This is the kind of conjecture, albeit controversial, at which we can only arrive with imagination. When we have a very limited amount of factuality, we can use apparent things as a way of supporting our imaginations. There are certain apparent things with which we can extend our imagination through the use of symbols. This is when a thing becomes the symbol for something else. This type of working will never take on the type of knowledge that is associated with facts, because that is forbidden and is maintained under the guise of secrecy and secret societies. That is what initiation means. In the next episode, we expand our understanding of the Ka, the Ba, and the Ak by examining their symbolic meaning as the physical, intellectual, and spiritual developments of man.